Howdy, friends. Welcome back to Feedstuffs 365. Andy Vance joining you for another conversation about what's happening in the marketplace. Yesterday we talked a bit about what was happening with regard to turkeys and the egg markets. Great conversation. If you missed it, go back and watch that at feedstuffs365.com on demand. Today we're going to be talking about butter. It seems like articles from eater.com to the Prairie Woman to Time Magazine have been talking about a butter shortage heading into the holiday. So we decided we better talk to somebody who actually knows what's going on in the butter marketplace to get a picture of what's happening in terms of supply, demand, prices, and so on. Joining us is Michael Dykes, who's president and CEO of the International Dairy Foods Association. Dr. Dykes, a veterinarian with practicing experience out there in the field, as well as a background in agricultural economics, has the dirt under your fingernails and also the market underpinning to understand what's going on out there. Michael, let's start with the big picture. If you will, give us, for folks who are not well versed in IDFA's mission and role and what you do, give us your elevator speech for the work that the association does on behalf of the industry.
Thank you, Andy. Thanks for having me. I like to start with just explaining kind of who IDFA is. We represent the dairy processors in this country. IDFA members process over 90% of the milk that's produced in the U.S. every single day. So if it's a gallon of milk in the store, if it's ice cream, if it's yogurt, if it's cottage cheese, if it's a dairy ingredient, a dairy whey protein in a protein bar, if it's an infant formula product, if it's cheese, chances are an IDFA member is the one that manufactured that. So that's who we are. We are focused on lobbying on behalf of our members, communications. We work with the agencies on the regulatory fronts. We have a focus on people, and we've recently hired a chief people officer because people is so important to our members, all the way from the next generation of leadership and leadership development and succession planning to making sure we have workers and we have policies and programs in place for all the workers across our many facilities that our member companies operate. Women in dairy, we are around 700 strong women in dairy. We have a diversity, equity, inclusion effort inside IDFA with our member companies. So those are some of the things we do. Andy, a little bit about who we are, what we do. We start once the drop of milk leaves the dairy farm.
Yeah, I love as you were going through the list of things that our processors make, and I started humming. These are a few of my favorite things as you were going through the list. All right, so let's get to the brass tacks here on this story. It seemed like the month of October, every media outlet going had some variation of there is a butter shortage coming, and here's what you need to know. Let's do a drive-by of the supply-demand situation, go back to first principles as you and I, as guys who have a little bit of economics under our belt. What's the current state of play with regard to the butter supply and demand picture in the U.S.?
Well, Andy, let's start by putting people at ease. We're not in a butter shortage. We have butter. So let's start with the drive-bys you said. We've been in the first half of this year, milk production is down in the U.S. about 1%. Milk production has been down in New Zealand, Europe, weather related issues. So we've had a decline in the supply of milk, but that has left us with less butter in storage. Supplies have been tight and prices have been higher. And people are turning more to the groceries rather than eating in the restaurants. So going into the holidays, there were some stories that butter was going to be tight. You need to get your butter. And so there might have been some pantry loading going on. But what we are finding now is and we knew all along, there's plenty of butter. Butter exports were up. So not only are Americans looking for butter, people around the world are looking for butter. Butter consumption, as has dairy consumption in general, increased. Dairy consumption's up about 12 pounds per person over year. Butter consumption's up about 2 pounds. Takes about 20 pounds of milk to make a pound of butter. So we have butter. Supplies are tighter. Prices are up. Exports have been up about 40% of butter to meet the global demand because milk production has been down elsewhere. But in September, we started to see an increase in milk production slightly here in the U.S., up about 1.7%, something like that. So bottom line, Andy, butter's here. Supplies are tight. Storage numbers are tight, but plenty of butter and prices are up.
You mentioned the weather issues around the world as one of the things contributing to the production challenges there, a little bit of drop off. I'm also thinking consolidation here stateside, at least the number of producers who have decided, hey, maybe it's time to retire and hang up my coveralls. Is certainly part of that story as well, given some of the challenges of feeding and milking cows. The pencil's got to be pretty sharp in the industry right now to stay afloat. I'm thinking that's a piece of that story as well.
Well, pencils have to be very sharp, but our producers are doing a fantastic job with genetics and production, milk production per cow. So even though we tend to have cow numbers are about flat, we see fewer farms, cow numbers are about flat, but production per cow continues to increase, Andy. The other issue in all of this is the cost. Everyone's cost line. So feed costs are up, labor costs are up, energy costs are up for fuel and so forth. So the cost items are up as well. And just we don't have enough workers for truck drivers. So the competition to move goods and services is escalated. All that's increasing costs. So you need a sharp pencil because of the current economic conditions we're in. Inflation, we're seeing grocery store inflations at a 43-year high, Andy. So all those are factors.
I think it's important for us to spend a minute on this topic of labor. I know this is one that has been a thorn in the side of dairy processors, dairy producers as well for some time now. You and I were talking about this kind of as we were preparing for the conversation today. I mean, is there, if there's a bigger challenge out there than labor when it comes to food production and processing, I mean, it's hard to think of what it might be aside from farmers' ongoing fight with Mother Nature and weather. But let's dig in on this labor issue for a little bit. Could you paint us a picture now for how significant that challenge is for your member companies across the country?
Well, let's start with some people think the premise is, well, you just pay them more. All of my members are paying them more, if you will.
Yeah.
The problem we have here, Andy, on labor, it's just a simple math problem. We have declining birth rates in the U.S. and in Western Europe. Most of the developed world, we have declining birth rates. We don't have enough births to replace those that are retiring. Baby boomers, about 10,000 baby boomers every day are turning 65. So it's a math problem. And I say on average, our IDFA members are down about 10% in the workforce. They've gone to flexible schedules. They've gone to part-time. We've gone to greater use of technology and automation. We're seeing automation and technology throughout the supply chain. Farmers are moving to robotic milkers, moving to robotic feeds that push the feeds up to the cows. We're seeing it in all the manufacturing facilities, all the places we can to use technology and automation because we just simply cannot get enough workers. That's the underlying problem. And I say too, Andy, it's the underlying problem with so many of these supply chain issues. We just don't have enough people to drive the trucks and move the things around and move them from place to place. It's a major issue for our members. And Andy, quite honestly, people say, well, so Michael, what's the answer to that? How are we going to create more people? Well, we aren't going to create more people. The answer to that, in our view, is we need immigration reform. We need to, the Workforce Modernization Act has passed the House of Representatives twice here in Washington. It's never passed the Senate. I think our best opportunity to make that happen is during the lame duck session when they return here after the elections and before the new members of Congress are sworn in. So we will see, but we have been pushing to make sure to encourage members of Congress, especially members of the Senate, to pass the Workforce Modernization Act. And we need workers not just at the farm, but we also need workers in the processing plant. So we want to see processing jobs added to that, Andy.
Yeah, one of the things I think is really interesting about the political calculus behind this, you and I were kind of commiserating. It feels to me like we've been fighting. I mean, agriculture interests that is, have been fighting this fight over immigration reform essentially my entire career as a journalist. It's not a new story by any stretch, but the thing I often find interesting, if you look at global geopolitics, a lot of times when you see revolution in the streets and regime change and so on, is when food is expensive, when people don't have enough to eat and so on. So when I see stories about butter shortages, even if those were not exactly exactly up with the facts of the situation on the ground, if people are worried about the cost of food, is that a time when their elected representatives are more amenable to, hey, maybe we actually ought to do something about this time?
Yeah, I think that's true, Andy. I mean, the Arab Spring, to the
Yeah,
point you're mentioning, and
right.
also I think the other thing we got to worry about, which is a big issue from a national security issue, is we watch what's happening in Russia and Ukraine. Much of the developing world relies on that area for foodstuffs, so which is why opening up those shipping lanes was so important.
Mhm.
And which is why the World Food Program is so important to try to get food out there. U.S. aid is so important. Uh, because we don't want additional uprisings, because when people have no hope and they have no food, but they got no other option. To the point, but I think the other thing too, Andy, that's coming to bear here is these supply chain challenges are everywhere. I mean, we've seen it with truck drivers, we've seen it with getting goods on vessels, we've seen it with getting the vessels into the ports and getting the vessels unloaded for the imports. We've seen it with the border and the border crossings, and I think there's always been a desire that says, well, let's close the border and then let's get a legal process in place. I think the recognition's coming that we can do that. We need to do all that at one time. We do need to close the border. We do need to get a legal process in place. And if we do so, we will have workers, and we need workers. And
Mhm.
if we don't have workers, we're going to have crops going to waste in the field, not getting processed. We're going to have an inability just to manufacture and distribute goods to the grocery store shelves, which won't be good for any one of us.
When you look at some of those individual pain points there, you were talking earlier, I think I heard you say that exports are up 40%. And so when I think about some of the supply chain issues that maybe showed up most apparently early on in the COVID pandemic, those first several months, container availability and getting ships loaded and unloaded was one of the first things that people really started to notice. Maybe our Amazon addiction was partially to blame for that we couldn't get things off containers that we wanted or not. But thinking about the current state of exports, you talked about imports and exports. What's it look like now? Go back to the dairy space, specific, and maybe butter even more particular. Where are we seeing growth, and what does that projection look like here as we get closer and closer to 2023?
Dairy exports are so important to our dairy industry. Andy, if we think about dairy, in the last 20 years, we've gone from negligible amounts of dairy exports to we're now exporting more of our dairy product than we are drinking. We're exporting around 17% of our dairy production, and we're drinking about 16% of our dairy production. Uh, our exports are growing both in volume and value. And I am of the view that the U.S. has some competitive advantages in terms of space, in terms of productive capacity of our dairy farmers. We can become the world's leading supplier of dairy products. And so we've had some record years. The last couple of years have been absolute record years for dairy exports. We at IDFA have worked closely with our members. We've visited probably about a dozen of the ocean carriers, the vessels. We visited the Port of LA, the Port of Long Beach, Oakland, Seattle, Savannah. We announced an alliance about a year ago with the Port of LA and CMA CGM, working with our members to make sure that we had coordination such that our dairy products could get to the port, get a booking on an outgoing vessel, and make sure we got our containers of dairy products on those ships rather than seeing those containers go back to China and elsewhere in Asia empty to be filled up with iPhones and other electronic goods to be brought back to the U.S. So it has been very helpful to us. We've seen tremendous progress, and we're continuing to work on that because exports is the lifeblood of our increased milk production coming. And it will facilitate our ability to become the world's leading supplier of dairy products.
And I thought the other thing that was interesting in that was when you were talking about some of the processing challenges the industry faces in milk production, the fact that you're seeing such significant dairy exports really does, I think, kind of underscore that point of some of the challenges that processors are facing around the world. It's not just here, but kind of shared pain throughout the industry. Is that a fair read?
Yeah, the labor issues are shared pain, especially between us and Europe and New Zealand. Another thing that our European colleagues are dealing with is energy cost because of the Russia conflict. Energy cost, Andy, instead of being 2 to 5% of total operating cost, energy cost may be 20% or more of total operating cost. And then also the whole farm to fork issue in Europe is going to make it extremely difficult at the farm level in Europe. So we have some great opportunities ahead of us in the U.S. dairy, and I'm very optimistic. As I said earlier, dairy consumption in the U.S. is continuing to increase year over year, 12 pound per person increase. We're just eating more of our dairy than we're drinking. Cheese is driving the bus. Cheese, butter, yogurt driving the bus on consumption, Andy.
I got a pretty good idea maybe for a mid-afternoon snack here. I'm gonna have to go see if we've got some cheese in the cupboard out here. I think that sounds like a great idea. You've talked me into it, Michael. I want to wrap up here, maybe going back to Congress a little bit. You mentioned the best chance for moving forward with Workplace Modernization Act would be here during the lame duck. We're still waiting to see how a few key races, particularly in the Senate, will shake out with the election happening less than 24 hours ago, really, the ballot counting starting. When you put your crystal ball out there on the table and look ahead to this next Congress, what are your feelings on how friendly or not the balance of power will be toward some of the key livestock industry issues and food processing industry issues that are on the table? Maybe not so favorable for immigration reform if you don't get it done here during the lame duck, but what are other issues that you're watching about and takeaways from the livestock and food processing space from the returns yesterday?
Well, Andy, I would start by saying let's look at the agriculture committees. The Senate's been evenly divided in the past. It will be probably one seat either way or evenly divided again. Probably won't know that till December Georgia runoff, maybe, Andy. But nonetheless, Senator Stabenow, Senator Bozeman will be either chair or ranking member. If we look at the House side, Congressman G.T. Thompson and Congressman David Scott both won re-election yesterday, and they'll either be chair or ranking member on the House side. Several members on the Democratic side of the House Ag Committee won re-election. So I don't know, Andy, that we're going to see a dramatic difference if the Republicans have a very narrow margin of 3, 4, 5 seats. It takes 218 to pass anything. It takes President Biden will be the president for the next 2 years. So there'll need to be alignment between the Congress and the White House for anything to become law. Food security, making sure we feed those that are less fortunate amongst us, I think will continue to be an issue. I foresee the government being funded when they get back here in the lame duck. So, Andy, I'm not sure we see a major upheaval, a major change. We got another farm bill to write in the midst of all this. That'll take longer than we probably anticipate. But I'm not sure we're looking at radical change, Andy.
Yeah, I think that lines up pretty well with how I read the returns as well, and we'll see on how some of these final races shake out to see if power on one side or the other of the hill shifts hands. But thanks for your insights and for sharing a little bit more about moving forward on this labor issue. Michael Dykes, President and CEO of the International Dairy Foods Association. Great to have you on. We'll look forward to having you back here again here sometime with Feedstuffs 365. Friends, it's been a great week. As I mentioned yesterday, we talked a little bit about turkey and eggs. If you missed that, go back and watch that conversation. I would encourage you to find that as well as all of our previous episodes on feedstuffs365.com, available to you on demand. Some great programming coming up next week as well. Stay tuned to your emails for updates on future programming, or of course you can follow via all of our social media channels, including Facebook, Twitter, and LinkedIn. Be there or be square. Until next time, I'm Andy Vance, wishing you a great rest of your week.